Welcome to Conversations on Inner Healing with the Teaching Fellowship Institute. Today, we will be discussing the key differences between inner healing and deliverance and why both are so vital to prayer ministry.
Today, we're going to talk about inner healing versus deliverance. And with me is Susan Brooks. I call her Susie. Susie, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for making time out to spend some time sharing your journey. So together, we're going to be sharing from a perspective of inner healing and deliverance and how the Lord in his amazing grace brings a reconciliation to both of those areas where they both meet for amazing freedom, a place of hope, wholeness, and maturation, not just for us, but for the body of Christ. And as you are fellows in this school, it is incredibly important that you know that there's a cadence to this. And so this lesson, we want to talk about some of the misunderstandings that all of us have had, perhaps even the abuses that we have seen as points of conflict between the two areas of inner healing and deliverance, and how the relationship between the two models of healing can really be necessary for us in practical ways as we walk out the process of our journey along the way with the Lord. And always in beautiful synchronization in the middle is that human spirit. Our human spirit is that our original design from which God calls us to live. And each one of us wants to walk in that cadence at all times. So Susie, welcome. Do you have any opening thoughts or remarks before we delve in to this topic?
I'm super honored to be here, and I think that to be able to share my perspective with future prayer ministers is a huge delight to me because I have found inner healing and deliverance to be so valuable in my life that I'm honored to be able to sow into the next generation of prayer ministers.
And, I really regard that about you, Susie, because one of the elements about you that has been so attractive, part of your healing, I'm sure, is your ability to see both sides of the coin, if you will, and to walk in that authenticity of ebb and flow. And truly, I'm going to share from my story, and Susie will share from hers as we talk about these topics and how the Lord can come in the side door oftentimes. So for mine, it is about inner healing. And I can tell you that for many, many years, I did not know how to face the various childhood traumas that I had been a part of, participated in, and the belief structures that I built along the way to try to stay safe. And Susie and I will show you this image. It's been, for me, the beginning of my journey was like walking with a heavy sack of rock uphill, barefoot, across terrain that was relentless with stones that were cutting my feet and barriers and burdens and relentless misunderstandings and inability to find my way. Susie, would you concur on that one?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So when we think about the way that we are to synchronize in our transformed journey as Christians, it is one thing to receive sanctification, but it is a whole other journey of adventure to walk in synchronization with the Holy Spirit from a place of authenticity of ourselves and authenticity of what God has asked and how others come in different ways and need to be called forward to be authentic in their own person. And we've seen that inner healing and deliverance are actually an ebb and flow in the work that we are demonstrating today as you learn to be more in tune with your heart and the tools that God has already given you, your story. So I won't bore you with the definition that's listed there in the inner healing, but you can look at it at your leisure in your notes. I do want to share with you that process of inner healing for me came after many, many years of hiding from my childhood traumas, those things that happened to me. I was an American born in a foreign country. I was born in Canada, and I lived in Toronto, a eclectic and marvelous city filled with ethnicity and cultures and very dynamic. We had all kinds of people groups from all over the world on my street, and I enjoyed and loved being a part of all the different cultures. It was a very overprotective childhood because I was born with several different medical ailments that my parents really didn't have enough understanding of what to do with. And so there was a sense of overprotecting me. I was the oldest and still am the oldest of three daughters. And for me, it was a very cozy and kept time of childhood where great imaginations happened to me and till I became about 10 years old. And at the age of 10, to my horror, I came home one day and found the jewelry box of my mother was gone from her dresser in her bedroom. And that was my first indication that there was something wrong. Because I looked around and asked, my mom said, "Oh, there's nothing. We're just going to go to the cottage." And we had a cottage up north in the Lake Ontario. We were going to go to the cottage early. That was striking because it was the middle of the school year, and I had no idea why my grandparents and my cousin had arrived just that day. Well, this was the beginning of what I have called in my book, Invite His Light, the Great Divorce. And it was the Great Divorce. It divorced me from myself, as well as it was a divorce between my parents, as my mother took us to Florida, which was, Susie, that thing, that was crazy. Just the terrain of the weather, having the changes of just such a hot environment, crazy, and such a change of ethnicity. I mean, it was the 1960s, and we were in Florida. It was just the breaking of segregation, and so you can imagine it was a tough time for a person from another country to come to this totally foreign environment and try to navigate. I soon found myself trying to figure out how to make food, how to keep my sisters safe, and I gave up my childhood. I absolutely abandoned being a kid. And for many of you that know, I'm still on the journey to becoming that kid and enjoying that at every turn. But this was the place where inner healing had to go back to in order so that I could be found again. And so oftentimes all of us can make agreements of sorts and connections inadvertently with trying to be safe, trying to forget some things that have happened and get on with life. Because I came to know the Lord at the age of 13. And that's a whole nother part of my testimony, which I share in other lessons. But for me, it was the onset of a lot of different deaths in a very short period. I had the onslaught of many, many deaths within a 5-month period. And that was my tipping point. Finally. And that wasn't until I was over 40 years old. So knowing this, can you all give yourselves a big break? Because it is a journey to know that it's systems of belief that we build, areas that we forget, generational elements that come in and add to that all the ways that the enemy wants us to think, well, you just don't need that. You don't need to be that way. They don't need you. And believe me, I was in the middle of being very successful in the secular world of trauma. I am in healthcare, doing trauma systems all over the state of Texas and heading those up. But in my heart, I couldn't even head up my own heart or find who I really was. And I performed really well, but not to my own self. Could not find a place of belonging within myself or really within the communities, even though they were delightful communities. They were not really truly from a place of my authenticity. So you can see that inner healing can start in a very unusual way. And yes, I did have to return to some areas of great pain and great having forgotten. And even today, I still have beautiful areas where God is maturing me even more to come into who I am. It's a delight. There have been places where deliverance and renunciation was required, where the demons and the other entities had gained a stronghold, for sure. Performance was definitely one of those for me. So looking at the areas of where we can begin to be safe to think our own thoughts again, that's striking, because I was good if I could do it this particular way. But what if I oppose things? Or what if I had a different viewpoint than the others? It wasn't so easy to figure out how to be with others in that. or living from a place of joy in the present. Well, that one was for sure something that was taken from me. And I did not recognize the fullness of the generational entities and my agreement with joylessness that had brought me down into a sense of no hope. That's one of the reasons that after I retired in healthcare that I'm doing this work alongside you all, because I have such hope that God transforms us and cares about how to transform us from glory to glory. It's so amazing. So when we bring that forward, we can look for God to not just keep us at one plateau. This business, and Susie will share about it, is we're like at zero when we think we got it right and we're walking that Christian life. But God's got plus 100 for us to go to, where we can make changes and impact our communities, our families, our whole countries and world in amazing ways that He wants to partner with us on. So we're on that journey, and that's this work. So I know I get really excited, but I want to tell you that there's still a risk abatement versus risk taking risks. Abatement meaning to try to keep myself safe. Sometimes I get really scared. And I've learned more and more through those bonds of fear that now can be taken down, that I can walk out and become more authentically me and walk through the fear and find the wholeness on the other side. Stretching and growing is part of the dynamics of inner healing and deliverance and coming into the fullness of our beautiful human spirit, all the ways that we are to possess the land that God has given for us. And that authentic design is part and center. But God does ask that we build some righteous structures so that the essence of our flow can pour through those structures that are meant for glory and meant to impact His kingdom come to earth. So I'm learning more and more to become that one that can be approachable. That's actually, I had a boss tell me once, Molly, you have to be approachable to work through with your staff. Oops, boy, that was a huge, huge word, but it launched me into some self reflection where I recognized another area where my lack of authenticity had hidden over the areas of being vulnerable and being approachable. And so becoming that safe place for others is a part of the work of becoming a prayer minister, as well as welcoming others to have their authenticity be approachable for you. It's the beautiful music of God to be allowed to work as a prayer minister with others. It's the music of your healing alongside with theirs. I don't think it ever stops. Susie, what do you think?
Yes, quite the ongoing work. I have found it to healing oftentimes coming in layers. You get one layer up and there's still another layer to that same issue. And then I may not revisit it for years,
Yeah,
but then the Lord will bring it back around at the right time when there's another layer to take care of.
I love that. Absolutely. Can you share with us on your journey and with deliverance and how the Lord has brought you along so far?
Yes, I realized just in the last year how important both components of inner healing and deliverance are in a journey to recover from brokenness to wholeness. And I've worked with several practitioners and found one was very skilled at deliverance. And when
Mm.
we would work together, she would go in and absolutely dismantle the structures the enemy had built there, the inroads he had used, really separate you from the grid of the enemy that keeps you walking in negative numbers in an area of life. You may walk very positive in positive numbers in one area of your life and be totally hosed in another, And
Absolutely. Totally right.
yeah, so I don't mean to pretend that someone in very negative numbers is a negative person, not at all. But if the enemy has an inroad and is able to manipulate that person's life, then that's where I've seen the deliverance be fabulous. But as you said earlier, I really want to echo those words. That brings you to zero. Your heart is still compromised. You still probably have beliefs that run like a, well, you remember cassette tapes. I don't know that the younger folks would, but let's just say an auto repeat MP3 or your Apple on repeat, your iPod. And you have those statements and those beliefs that run in the background. So although you've been through deliverance and you've come to a real clean place, zero, the next time you move forward in life in that area where the enemy had bondage, had you in bondage, you're still going to have that compromised hurt. The hurt, the wounds in your heart that have compromised your ability to be fully synchronized, spirit, soul, body, and heart. And
Wow.
that's God created us to be whole and to operate out of wholeness, but you're still compromised at that point. So a skilled inner healing practitioner who also knows deliverance would take you from that point. They get you there. And then through inner healing, they'll bring the truth of what they'll work with you to hear from the Lord the truth of that's the opposite of what you believed about yourself. Like you feel rejected. God can work through an inner healing session to show you just how valued you are uniquely as a person. And that dismantles that wrong belief. So the next time when you're faced with, I really feel rejected, where the enemy tries to tempt you with that or somebody else push that on you, you're like, you remember how God showed you how uniquely he accepted you, and the foothold is just not there anymore. So
Praise. That's
yeah.
true. That's true. I've seen that in place.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Inner
That's
healing will bring you to the positive numbers where you can't be yanked back down into the negative territory anymore.
that's so great. Yeah. That's great. Can you share now from the perspective of your journey and how that deliverance, I think, was your inroad on your journey as you began to come forward in your life? Can you share from that?
Yes. Um, so for me, um, things that destroy your inner world started quite young for me. So there was a lot of structures built by the enemy and kind of in your thought life being programmed a certain way to believe about yourself. And um, so I'm going to take one particular area of victimization. Let's
Okay.
just look at that spirit of victimization.
Sure.
And I heard someone teach many years ago, Arthur Burke from the Sapphire Leadership Group. He taught many years ago about the spirit of victimization, and he called it the victim spirit. And someone who has that has it play out in life in lots of different ways. It can be quite minor things. You just think little things like you always get in the longest line at the bank
Well, yeah.
or
Simple
at the
things.
grocery store. And so the enemy steals from you in any way he can. And if you have that that in your heart, like, well, I guess that's just how it is for me, or well, I don't, I never choose the right lane or the right grocery line. And people actually start treating you that way. And you open yourself up for more and more of that theft of your honor and your dignity and your time. And so that was a big part of my journey, was coming out from that mindset. First, dismantling the generational things. And that's where deliverance was very key, to go back in my generational line, find the iniquities that open the door, renounce them, receive forgiveness, give forgiveness, and cleanse that generational line. And then also have to look at, where have I empowered that? So it
Very
came
good.
generationally, but through my actions, I empowered that iniquity in my own life. And by agreeing with the enemy, yeah, I guess that is all I am worth. I'm not worth that, or I don't have that kind of good fortune. I have bad fortune. you
Yeah.
know, After so many damaging instances in childhood, you can easily believe that.
Yeah.
I have
Becomes
bad
your
fortune.
construct. Becomes your construct. It's like, well, yeah, like you said, that's just the way it is.
Mhm. So let's just look at that financially in my life. So
Okay.
a practitioner got me to zero. But then I go to buy a new car, and God does everything he can to get me in a good deal, but I still sit there and receive a not stellar deal, because that's what is familiar to me. I still have the wrong beliefs inside that, well, I don't have good fortune. I don't, let's just say good luck. I don't have good luck like some people, or it's not me to push back. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't like to rock the boat. I want to be the nice person. So for at my own expense, I help other people and I do things for other people and to help them have a good deal. And that was me even just a few years ago, buying
And
a
I want to comment that that's so critical because that's your very gifted area. You actually have a side business in that world of finance, right?
finance. Yes, I can give good advice to someone and I can recognize their good habits and see the good fruit of it, but it's very difficult to implement in my life. Going back to the picture we looked at of someone pushing the wheelbarrow up hill, where all the baggage and the rocky road, the bare feet. So even if you get rid of all that, that person that is compromised in their heart still has to continue up that hill. So they may
Mm.
get rid of the baggage, but they need to be whole as a person. You can't do that with a sprained ankle and I don't know, you know, digestive issues and let's just
Yeah,
think of things
yeah,
that would hold you back from being able to move up that hill because it's a tough journey.
absolutely,
Life is
absolutely.
Life's going
Wow.
to present challenges. So let's just say here I am at zero. I go to purchase a car and I just don't push back. I just buy the car. And God gave me a good deal in one way, but the enemy passed along extra baggage in another and I took it. And this was just a few years ago when I just started. I was in my first year of my healing journey. And um, that is real common in life to get to zero but you don't have all the inner workings healed in that spirit, soul, body, heart, magnificent, dynamic way that God designed us to function. There's still something broken. So I move out in an area where I've all my life experienced victimization and my family has too.
Mm.
And get to a place, a particular point in time where a decision has to be made and you make a decision that still allows the enemy in because I didn't push back against, well, you're only giving me this much for this car and I'm paying this much for the new one. And so it wound up being, a hefty price tag on that trade years ago.
Wow.
And
And that to me reminds me of that the perimeter, the boundaries of your person aren't protected. There's no security.
that's true. That's a great picture.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, but it's interesting to see the hand of God in it and the hand of
Yeah.
the enemy, and they're all
Yeah.
constantly duking it out in your life.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So how
yeah.
did you build a platform going forward from that car? Was that the lemon? Would you call it a lemon that you got?
No, I actually got a really wonderful car and I got
Okay.
it 0% financing, but the value of the trade-in was really low, extremely low. And it was just, poor decision on my part probably to make that trade at that time, but I think they could have done better for me. And, so years down the line, you haven't recovered financially from that and it's time to go make another transaction, which,
Hey, more
yeah.
story.
More story, which brings us to just recently a car transaction. And this was an indicator to me that I still had um the some signs of the victim spirit. I was working on some work for his whole house and looking up how to know, what are some indicators that you have boundary issues. And victim spirit is a boundary issue. It is definitely a boundary issue,
Certainly is. Certainly
but
is.
not just outwardly, inwardly.
Good point.
Because you allow it. You allow um the the harmful part in. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um
It's
it
kind of
was
like it's like you're looking for the inroad. Where's the access points? Where's the elements that are, yeah, allowing for this?
mm,
Sounds like that's what you had to look for.
yes. And so I realized that car buying is purchasing a car is kind of I dread that. I dread that instance.
Oh, wow.
It's not a joy, it's a dread. And because of how it's always been, it's never a really great deal for me. But this time I found myself sitting there without planning or without feeling like I was trying to be somebody else, to be that responsible person over there that pushes back and has a good deal. I didn't feel at all like I was trying to imitate anybody or be anyone other than myself. And I
Wow.
just looked at the numbers and very matter of fact pointed out that this was not a good deal and this was not a good deal and neither was this. And something needed to give because that was not a win-win situation.
And you said that?
Yes. And they
Wow.
said, okay. So they went back and they came back with new numbers. And
Okay.
yeah, and I think this is a layer thing, a whole nother layer or two have come off in my healing journey between 2020 and now, where I was a different person sitting at the negotiation table of a car purchase. And
Mhm.
I look forward to what the next one will be. And I hope it's not for 3 or 4 more years, but what will I look like then? And what kind of deal will that person get because I've moved even further up the spectrum into wholeness. And it takes a
I
whole person.
I think you even have you saying that you look forward to the next purchase is even a marked, change for your deliverance in that area. Wow.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It's because it comes from a place of hope in my heart. My hope is in the Lord and his unfailing love for me, and he is not gonna leave me where I'm at right now. Although it's better than where I was 3 or 4 years ago, he's constantly moving me into more wholeness.
Yeah. And I celebrate that with you. And I know that you have shared that story with a number of people in a number of different settings, including me, several different areas of that particular story. And I want you to talk about what it means to savor and celebrate. Can you share on that when it
Yes.
comes to deliverance like that?
Yes. Um, this trade was interesting because I traded in a vehicle that was immaculate, and I picked one up that had 3 immediate repair needs. But I was trading down, and that was one of my goals was to trade down. I don't need the higher price. I don't want the higher payment. I want a lower payment. And I realize I'm a work in progress, and I trusted in God's love for me and that he wasn't going to be just like, oh my gosh, she just failed again. He was gonna, he looks for the good and the bad. He recognizes areas we need healing, but he celebrates the things I did right. And so even though there's challenges facing me even today with the car decision I made, it's I don't feel in despair at all. I feel like it's a challenge and it's a dominion exercise. The Lord is giving me, he's trusting me more and more to move in dominion and wholeness. And so I don't have that beat myself up anymore over getting, having challenges. Challenges aren't an indicator that there's something wrong with me or that I did
Yeah.
something wrong.
That beautiful ability to linger and savor actually builds something within your spirit, I'm sure, and
Mhm.
anyone's spirit that begins to absolutely walk in an exercise of dominion, like you said. And for the students, I point you back to the scripture that we are referencing, Acts 20, 22, 24. Paul said, I see now I go bound in the spirit to Jerusalem, not knowing the things that will happen to me there. And you can read on. And that to me is an example of what you're sharing with us today, that your authenticity in being willing to be bound in your spirit first and led by your spirit is causing you to move in the direction of God's best and receive what it is he's teaching you to increase in and become more in those positive numbers.
Mhm.
Does that seem true, Susie? Or do you
It
want to add?
does. It does. And I love about that verse, I recognized that in my life when I first came to the Lord. At
Mm,
about age 30, and I was very green, like, had just pretty fresh from a pretty worldly lifestyle, and, gave my life to the Lord, and he began to move on me to go to mission school, and I disagreed. I thought, "Well, what on earth would I do? I don't know anything about anything. I don't know scripture," I was raised in a Methodist church where we were kinda taught, "Do this, don't do that," "Be
mhm,
good," and
mhm.
so I knew the basic rules of be good, but I didn't really know what the word said. And so what kind of minister would I make? I mean, and so the Lord bound me to this mission school though. That was his plan. And I was bound in the spirit. And as I I started to say, no, I'm going to go over here and go to Bible school first. Then I'll go to mission school, but I'm going to do Bible school first. So as I begin to move this way, you can imagine a rubber band tied to the plan of God in my spirit, and I move away from it. It's going to pull that tension, is going to get tight and pull me back to God's.
Yes. A
And
big
that's
spring, right?
right. And that's how it felt. Whew. Okay, now the tension's gone. Okay, I'll go to mission school, but I don't know anything and I'll move back this way. No, you just get drawn back to it. And I know now enough about the working of the spirit realm to know that anything that God does beautifully, the enemy will mimic, and he'll do as well. And there's a powerful dynamic of being bound in the spirit. And so the enemy will try to do that with you as well. So back to our story of inner healing and deliverance and the nuances of each and why each is necessary is you have the enemy bound, you're bound in many ways to the negative numbers through spiritual structures, generational crud, wrong beliefs that you have, and you can break all of the darkness off and get a person to zero, but then they're going to have a hard time operating in really high numbers until you bring them healing into the brokenness in their heart. And that's where I have found such huge change in my life, is by the times, not that just the enemy, that the Lord broke me free from the enemy, but then he sat with me and he showed me my value. He instilled truth in me. And we worked on those wrong beliefs. I renounced them. I accepted his truth. And then I moved on a little more whole than I was before.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for being with us today. So today, as you hear about deliverance and inner healing from personal stories, I hope you have more understanding of how they work in synchronization, are meant to become a melody of God's wondrous sound and frequency into our inner person, from a perspective of giving us the joy of walking out this work of transformation.